Please welcome Gloria Higgins, President of Executives Partnering to Invest in Children, Colorado.
Thank you very much. I have to tell you that the last panel just perfectly teed up our panel. It's so exciting how we can take how businesses look internally and really try to do some support for their employees and for the children of their employees in ways that are very, very complex. So our challenge as this panel is to look more broadly and say if the business community is being looked to as a leader in developing some change around how the advocacy and the implementation of child care issues and early childhood development are taking place, I think this panel probably has the best ideas I've heard from any single group ever. So I am very pleased to ask each individual to give about a 1-minute background perspective, just so that you can get a sense of where they're coming from, and then we'll come back and ask the individual questions. Doug.
Okay, thanks. That's a lot of pressure, and then to have to go first right after that stuff. But I work for an economic development organization, and within that organization we have the third largest chamber of commerce in Michigan. We have a funding arm for businesses in a 10-county region, and we have a for-profit development division. And we have included early childhood as one of the parts of our economic development program for about the last 15 years. It really didn't get much traction on that until about the last 4 years. And even though we were very involved with different initiatives, those initiatives were always driven by the advocates. So it was the kind of the usual suspects, and bringing mass groups of parents, mostly moms, to the state capitol to demand that everything be fixed for early childhood, but nothing really specific. About 4 years ago, the Children's Leadership Council of Michigan was formed by the Center for Michigan. And I became co-chair of that, along with who is now Congressman Debbie Dingell from Michigan. And we began to look at this from a business perspective. And we took very specific incremental steps to the governor from very influential business leaders around the state of Michigan. And over that 4 years, we've gotten more done to introduce this as a concept and to get funding. We've brought about $500 million of new funding for early childhood programs in the state of Michigan, working our way down or upstream, depending on who the speaker was today, from preschool to where we're now working on 0 to 3. It's been helped a lot, though, by the battle for talent. And we've been able to identify through the literature and through research, my minute's way up, I'm sorry, this issue that talent is one of the 3 major issues. Well, talent's the big issue. One of the 3 major issues affecting talent is access to quality childcare. And even to take it a step further, availability of childcare. So as we talk today, maybe we'll go into a little bit more about how we address that.
Thanks. I'm Tony Carvajal with the Florida Chamber Foundation, and like Doug, we also have a broad array of areas that we look at. And much of the work in Florida on child care has obviously been done by advocates over time, but not because businesses don't care. I think there are 2 things that I continually focus on. One is whatever it takes to secure Florida's future, and that's working in partnerships, doing research, and creating programs to ensure that we can leverage one of the common and most important economic development elements, and that's talent. We do take a cradle-to-career perspective, and actually even beyond focusing on encore careers as well. There is no part of the spectrum that you can ignore. But I mentioned that there is a second part of what I do day in and day out, and maybe one of the things that we can talk a little bit more about is how do we get more effective communication on the valuable issues that we've been talking about today. Some days I am the bane of the existence of every advocate in the state, in that we have to argue that we have to step back, change our language, change the tone, make sure that we are focusing on things that will actually resonate, not only with business leaders, but with legislators, with parents, with families across the states. And others, we're barreling forward and inviting some of the many great speakers that we've even had here so that we share the best ideas. I hope that we get a chance, if you don't mind, at some point to talk about what's worked and what hasn't. I will mention two things before I expire my minute, which I know is probably 2 or 3 minutes already. But one is, if you want to see some of the things that we've created with the Business Alliance for Early Learning, in partnership with so many folks in the state, including the children's movement, some folks out of the state like CED, who I see here today, you can go to our website, floridachamber.com/earlylearning, and see how we have created tools and resources to actually communicate with businesses. The second thing is, it's all about collaboration and working in partnership. I'll make one note now in case we don't get to this. There is a way to communicate with everybody in this space, but not every message is suited for everyone. So we've got to find the right way to partner the messages, the ideas, so that we can actually achieve the outcome that we want, not just advocate for processes. So thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I'm Craig Rupert. I represent the Rupert Companies. I'm the CEO. We do landscape construction primarily and commercial grounds maintenance. So I'm here as a volunteer board member of Easter Seals, which most of you have probably heard of. I'm on the board here in the Washington chapter, and I have gotten to know them, participated with them for 30 years, and they've affected my family, me personally, and my business and my outlook on the role of business and the community. So I'm happy to represent them, and I'll share a little more when time permits here.
You have a very exciting story, I think, from my perspective, when we get to the Easter Seal story. I'm very pleased with that one.
Thank you.
Jim?
Hi, I'm Jim Sperlino. I'll give you the 60-second version of how I came to the early childhood space. I own a small concrete company. We only have about a couple hundred employees in Southwest Ohio near Cincinnati. And I can't stand up here like the Boeing and Procter & Gamble guys and say I'm the biggest in anything. But we're very happy where we are and what we do. It's a nice sized company. I was in my office one day, actually reading the Wall Street Journal early one morning, and had read on the front page an article about a home visitation program called Every Child Succeeds in Cincinnati, and had that terrible little pixelated picture of the executive director on it and everything. And I started reading it, and I thought, well, this is an odd article for the front page of Wall Street Journal. But I read it, and what interested me was, number one, why was it in Wall Street Journal? But number two was, the interesting parts of it was how it was formed and how it was operated. And in particular, of interest is it had Procter & Gamble DNA in it. It was started to a large degree when John Pepper, who's a former CEO of Procter & Gamble, read a book called Inside the Brain by Ron Kodalak. And I was talking with Dr. John last night about that book and her book, and I'm very interested to read her book, and talking about how those are the kind of books that are so helpful in that they put into regular English for all us kind of business guys that we can understand, and to be able to understand brain science in such a simple way helped tremendously. But that was the genesis of how Every Child Succeeds started. And then I got to know the organization and got to see how they were run, and they really were touted in the article as being run like a business. So kind of the Neanderthal businessman in me said, oh, that's interesting. I'd like to get to know more about this organization. But what also drove home my interest in it was part of Cincinnati Children's Hospital, which is not just a pediatric hospital, but it's also a very large research institute. And their part of the founding of this home visitation program was to make sure there was a strong research component to everything that they do. And so those are the things that drew me to it. Was I could see that the research was serious and was impactful, and I could see that it was run like a business, which was meaningful to me and was speaking my language. And I could see that they were having the results that they intended, that they were a true evidence-based program producing outstanding results. And from a businessman perspective, reading the Wall Street Journal, it was quite a journey, but it was a journey that I've found has been so worthwhile in so many ways, and particularly to see the crowd that's here today and to hear all of the other speakers and panelists, and to know that this is a very bright group, a very enlightened group, that we can do so much more, and I look forward to it.
I think just to continue with the tone that you all have set, is that earlier there was some discussion that we should need to change the way we communicate around early childhood. And I think I would like to throw a gauntlet out there that basically says, for the leadership, for this business leadership, what I'm observing is it's the entrepreneurial spirit, not just the business leader as a vernacular, but it's that thought process that really wants to dig into very deep and challenging problems with interesting solutions. So I have a set of prepared questions that kind of tip off the problems. So you can just give a brief answer to the problem that I'm going to give you, and then kind of show how you've addressed it. And then I think we'll get to see the real picture that comes out. So Doug, the first question basically is talking about how and why affordable childcare is a significant barrier to workforce participation.
Hey, Michigan lost 2 million residents during what we call our lost decade, the first 10 years of the year 2000. And certainly the folks from Ohio took their share of that. The folks from Florida took their share of that. Alabama, Georgia, you're here. We lost a lot of workforce. The auto industry was way down. And, really, when we used to say when Detroit sneezes, Michigan gets a cold. Well, the auto industry is back big time, and the suppliers are back. But in the meantime, other industries started to really develop, and they developed new clients. So agriculture, tourism, manufacturing, healthcare, a very diverse economy that is really servicing and has clients everywhere in the world. But they're mostly suppliers to larger companies. So the suppliers demand that you meet their culture. So we heard from Patagonia, we don't supply Patagonia, but even military contracts. The Department of Army and the military demands certain sorts of things, net zero waste, renewable energy, et cetera. So business had to change, and it had to attract new types of talent. Well, talent can go almost anywhere anymore. Everybody's talked about talent as an issue. And the talent that we're talking about, whether it's the next generation that's taking over the company from their parents, or new talent coming into the region, doesn't just want to have certain things, they expect it. They've lived other places. When they've been in college, they've seen it. They expect certain things. They expect environmental stewardship. We live on the Great Lakes. Clean water is very important. Our watershed is very important. They expect diversity. That's a really hard one for us. We don't have a very diverse rural community. And they expect to have certain types of things, a family-friendly workplace. They expect the culture in their workplace to accommodate their lifestyle and their family needs. And a big part of that is childcare. We know that if we just had 2% more available childcare in the state of Michigan, 43,000 more women would be able to go to work in Michigan. We have 150,000 jobs that are unfilled there. So that would go a long way toward helping us, assuming that the skill sets match the jobs that are available. But those are a lot of the things that have driven us to really look at this issue and have driven our governor and the governor before him, Jennifer Granholm, to look into the future and see that the state needed to address this issue.
Jim, the question or the concept or the problem that it would be helpful if you could address is recruiting with the right people with the right skills. You have a business, 100 people, if you're missing too many jobs or adequate employees in those jobs, it has bigger impact than it would at Procter & Gamble. So how does having the right people in the right skill set, not being away because of childcare issues or whatever there might be, how does that affect your business? Because it's not a female-oriented business.
Well, I think that's kind of a sexist thing to say. But,
I know.
I think no matter what size the company, whether it's Boeing or Procter & Gamble, finding the right people and finding enough of them is a huge problem. Particularly how I want to kind of transition a little bit and just tell a brief story. But I was involved in Dayton, Ohio, which is just north of Cincinnati, in a group of business leaders that came together to address workforce development. And we all had the exact same issues surrounding trying to find, the right skilled people and what were the issues, why couldn't we? And it was amazing to me, a couple things. One is that there was almost no recognition nor conversation about issues like childcare and why we're not actually retaining employees, not just recruiting employees. And number two was the appetite was generally towards something that was going to have some influence very quickly. And so this group in general wanted to start talking about what can we do to get more high school graduates, and then some sort of post-high school training certificate, 2-year degree, maybe a 4-year degree. What can we do more to start filling that pipeline? And it took a while. We actually met over, our direction was to meet over the course of a year, every 2 months, and to come up with some specific suggestions for the county commissioners and the Dayton city commissioners. And in the end, I can remember realizing why I was actually invited to the group, because when I was first invited, I was like, I'm not that guy. I'm not the post-high school guy. I'm the early ed guy. And but they gave me a chance to talk a little bit, and we talked about. They did realize, if you don't get to be a graduate in high school, you're not necessarily then going to probably avail yourself to that training certificate degree. And we're not graduating more than about 80% at best of our kids out of high school nationwide. That's a huge problem. But it was interesting, and a number of speakers have talked about how you can back folks up from why didn't they graduate from high school? Well, they weren't doing so well in 9th grade, and they weren't, their 8th grade math scores weren't very good. And we've got research in Cincinnati that shows that 8th grade math scores highly correlated to 3rd grade reading scores, and on and on. I know we've all had our share of statistics and information. We all know all that stuff, but it was pretty easy to back them all the way down into early childhood. And that logic helped convince them that not only should we invest in something that will benefit us all in the coming years, but we need to start making that long-term investment. Because the thing that I think convinced these businessmen was pretty simple. It was about money. They truly want to know the economic ROI. They want to know the dollars. They want to actually know, how is that going to help? And when you've got in inner cities, roughly half of your births are Medicaid paid, you can start convincing people that there's real dollars there and there's a significant issue. But they want to know those real dollars. And they also like to understand particularly how, if you can start investing long term, can we start making some sort of dent long term? And you don't become a 100-year-old company like Boeing, or Procter & Gamble is probably more than 100, without caring about the future. And so what was interesting to me was getting that group of businessmen to actually say, yeah, okay, we actually had 2 recommendations. We said, let's create a college promise. So any kid that graduated in that county around Dayton, Ohio, graduated from high school, was guaranteed up to 2 years of fully paid tuition at one of the local colleges, and we got all the local colleges involved. Then we also made a commitment to create a preschool promise, but even more importantly was then to go back and increase our 0 to 3 program to make sure that we were making a commitment prenatally forward. Because a lot of the guys in that group, and there's probably some manufacturers here will understand, if you have a manufacturing problem with your end product, you don't go back in the middle somewhere and try and figure out. You don't do more testing towards the end. You go all the way back to that root cause. And I did hear Dr. Jana talk about the 5 whys, and that is, for those of you that haven't heard of that, that's the Toyota way. It's the gold standard of manufacturing. It says you can't find the root cause of a problem without asking the question why 5 times. And you get that way, you can get that way very easily by saying, why aren't we having more high school graduates? And you don't almost need 5, you need fewer than that, but you can find that root cause. And I think some of the most important parts that came out of that meeting was making sure that people understood we need to start invest early, not just we need a 2-prong approach, but we need that early investment, or not only will we not have those skilled workers for the future, but even as a country we'll continue to become less competitive, less economically competitive, as what we've all seen in the PISA scores that are done every 3 years on 15-year-olds, where we rank routinely 20 to 25th in science, math, and reading. And I think that's appalling to everybody, but businessmen really get money, skilled workforce for the future, being competitive internationally.
Thank you. Tony, the question, although I could use 50 words to say it, basically says, how did you change the communication? How did you change the message?
I get 50 words?
No,
I can't introduce myself in 50 words.
No. My question could have been 50 words, but I think it breaks down to communication.
Yeah, how do we change the communication? Mm-hmm. I think that, let me start by highlighting this. System change, changing anything at a business level, a community level, at a legislative level, must start with the presumption that there is already research out there. While we definitely did our background work, we studied many of the things that we've discussed here today. We invited many of the speakers, actually, who participated in this process today to Florida at different times. We then had to start breaking it down into what is it that we have to communicate rather than let's communicate everything at all. I think the most difficult thing that advocates of every stripe, not just early learning, but I find especially for those of us who are very passionate about early learning years, is that we must have everybody believe everything we believe in. And that's not absolutely true. What we need to understand is what is the outcome that we want. We want a great system that delivers talent over a lifetime. We are committed to our communities. We're committed to our employees. We're committed to the system change to make sure that this works over time. And what we had to break down was the essential elements that we had to communicate. And then we had to stand firm on one other line, and this is the most difficult line for us, and that is business has a role in this whole process. To put it bluntly, we're a crowbar. We can open doors and allow people to have conversations in rooms that oftentimes wouldn't happen because people are very passionate in trying to communicate their points of view. When and there are clearly business people who are going to stand up like Jim that are going to say, look, this is what I believe in, this is what I want to do, this is what I will advocate for, but we don't have to get all 10 million businesses in Florida and business leaders in Florida to the table, to the Capitol to make those changes. What we have to do is make sure that they're communicating with each other, making the soil fertile for the right types of conversations. We know that investing as early as we possibly can helps not only a manufacturing model, but a life cycle model. We know that developing talent from the earliest years is going to have big dividends to talent in the long term. We also know things like when a child care center calls a parent at work, there will be disruptions, and there are productivity loss from sick days, from attention days. We don't have to fully document it, though I would love to work on a project that documented those types of things, because we can tell a different story then. The bottom line is we changed the communication not by trying to tell everything we knew to everybody we met, but what is it that we have to tell to whom so that we can get the outcome that we want. And occasionally that also requires us to stand away from commitments to processes, commitment to certain things, knowing that in the end, the right causes, the right information will get us what we need to accomplish. It's a tough battle. But not unlike a parent, sometimes you have to do the right things at difficult times. And the business community stood up, and we've created a business alliance for early learning that does everything from communicate, collaborate, bring people together, communicate to legislators. We are moving towards developing all those legislative agendas that we need to, creating, actually, I'll tip my hat to Michigan and say, we love what they've done, and we'll get there. But Florida wasn't completely ready at that particular point. Nobody wants to be patient on something this important, but we had to take a patient approach to make a difference.
Craig, the story I heard about Easter Seals and the scholarship program that is made available to families with special needs children, that's a great story. Would you like to share that with the group?
All right, at the risk of sounding like I'm running for office or something, I may not exactly answer that question.
Okay.
But I grew up 5 miles from here. I was one of 8 kids. I was in the middle. And we needed some money when we were young, so I started cutting grass like a lot of people do. And that ultimately turned into a business. And about 10 years after I started it, I learned what a nonprofit was, and a friend of mine called me and said, "Do you want to help raise some money for this organization called Easter Seals? As part of it, you get to go on TV." And I'd watched a lot of TV, but I'd never been on it. So I said, "Yeah, that sounds good." So I participated in the telethon and raised $1,500 and learned more about what Easter Seals was all about. They asked me to do it the second year and the third year, and I did it and raised more each year and enjoyed it and learned. Then they asked if I'd consider being on the board, and I said, sure. I'd never been on a board before. I didn't really know what a board was, but I said yes, and I thought, well, I should learn more about them, and they invited me to go to one of their centers called in DC, the Children's Center, which I did, and when I got there, I realized I'd been here before, and I was there 30 years earlier with my mom dropping off my youngest sister, Colleen, who has Down syndrome. She was 2 when she started at Easter Seals, and so it made it easy for me to say, yeah, I'm going to become part of this board, and I've stuck with it over the years. Colleen went to Easter Seals because at that time there was nowhere else to go. In early childhood, my mom was a nurse and my dad was an architect, but my mom recognized that getting an early start was smart, and she entered a Montessori program there at age 2, and she went on to go have a great education, both with Easter Seals and several others through high school. She then got a job with the government printing office, where she was for the next 30 years. She recently retired, and instead of being a person that needed help, she was a person that gave help, paid taxes, and really contributed at a much higher level. And she then went on to become a volunteer at Easter Seals. So the message, I guess, from the story is starting young really makes a difference. And she's an example of that. And I think when I look at what Easter Seals and many organizations like them are doing, is things are much more advanced than they were. Inclusive education is now part of it. It wasn't then. And I think that's made it better. It's also become more affordable in many cases because Easter Seals get support from business and community that makes it affordable. And those two things are really important. So thanks for letting me wander on.
No, I love it. I love it. I think the last question, and I'll give you a couple of minutes to think about it, and so I'll ramble a little bit before then, but I think if you had one thing to say about how you would encourage business people, business leaders, business entrepreneurs, to take some leadership in driving the change that we all kind of envision in our head, what would that be? So that's going to be the big last question, because I think there has to be some great takeaways of, I'm not a big business, so I can't really have in-house childcare, but I do care. And while you're taking a couple of minutes, I'm going to respond to a question I think that was talking about the tax credit in Colorado a little bit. We're not as good as Minnesota, and we probably haven't done as much as Michigan. Colorado is kind of a Western cowboy state. And so we, of course, have no way to move support for early childhood down through our Constitution. So we have to get creative in ways that we can be supportive. And almost 20 years ago, the state legislature at that time initiated what we call our child care contribution tax credit. And it's a way that businesses or individuals like me or whatever can make a direct contribution to a child care center that is designed to improve quality. So it has guardrails around how the child care center can spend it. But it does, in fact, provide a 50% tax credit, Colorado tax credit for that contribution. And the contributions can be up to $200,000. So they made it big enough to matter. Individuals or businesses can get up to $100,000 tax credit. Not very many of them get that because they don't make that many contributions. But I just received the numbers back for the last 2 years of contributions from the Department of Revenue to say that for the last 2 years, we have nearly, as taxpayers, contributed $50 million each year to child care centers. That's, in the small businesses that most child care centers are, that's serious money. And it tells me that our state is very supportive of child care. They don't know what to do. And I think that leads on to, other than give a few dollars where they can to various child care centers, but that leads on to the business community, because I think there's a serious interest by the general business community in supporting early childhood and getting down to that root cause. I think they've all been to business schools enough or classes enough to understand ask the same question why 5 times. They don't know what to do. So the big challenge is those of us that are very interested and very committed to early childhood and have some influence in the business community, how can we help our peers that may not be a big multinational company, may be the coffee shop down the street, may be many of our most active, in Colorado, many of our most active businesses are construction owners, which is amazing to me that they're dealing with and it sounds sexist again, but the side of the family that doesn't have the full responsibility for childcare in the home, but is very, very concerned about it. So I think there's a deep concern from almost all of Colorado residents, and I'd like and we'll just go down the line and kind of give your thoughts as to what's the best way to motivate individuals that look up to you in your industry or in your community or in your state.
Oh, gosh.
I'm glad you sat there.
Yeah. Sorry about that. It's a hard question for a lot of reasons, but one reason is I really think that once we've solved the issue that there's low unemployment and we don't have enough workers, that this will become yesterday's issue and we'll lose a lot of the interest that's in it. So while we like to sit around we at Children's Leadership Council of Michigan and kind of pat ourselves on the back, we know that we were lucky. We were in the right place at the right time in terms of the things that we got done in the state of Michigan and the attention that we have from business right now. So in terms of what we do with business, I like what you said about we don't have to communicate with anybody. And I think the old 80-20 rule here really applies. 80% of the businesses in our region really don't care about childcare or early childhood or even the schools. They care about what's happening with their business. They would never say, I don't care, but they're not going to jump in with both feet and go be an advocate. They're not going to repeat language we say. So we really have to do a lot of it for them. We're their advocates. We're the organizations that work on their behalf, and use that strong 20% and focus those messages and continue to educate that 20% of the business community on why it's in their best interest to support this. As soon as we move it to a moral issue for them, I think we lose them. It's not a moral issue for most businesses. It's a bottom line economic issue for them, and they're doing it because it's good for their business. So we have to continue to show why it's good for their business, even when this crisis that we have in terms of talent attraction turns the other way, or when we switch from an all-Republican legislature in Michigan to a mixed or an all-Democrat legislature. We have to be really flexible in our messages and make sure we hang on to that core group of business leaders that's really committed to the issue.
Thank you. That's great.
So I think I'll add that there is probably not a business person or a person in any state for that matter that doesn't care. It's just that they have 100 issues that they have to deal with in a particular day, not only to run a business, close the business, and you hurt the family in any case. So, it's important that they focus on workers' comp and tort reform and all the other issues. And when we can capture somebody with a lot of energy in any of the talent spaces, then we engage them. But we had a conference last week. Each year, the Florida Chamber Foundation hosts the Learners to Earners Summit. Like I said, it's a cradle-to-career perspective. And what I did was I brought my notes on how I closed our first day. We had a little more than 180 different leaders in there, most of those businesses, some of those organizations that actually came just to hear about early learning, after school, and summer slide. Amazing. You know, if you had told me 5 years ago we would be able to attract that many folks in just for those topics, I would have said, great, I'll see it when it happens. Well, it happened. And here's how I closed that day, because I think that Doug mentioned something very particular in there, is sometimes people just need to know what to do. So these were my closing comments, and then I'll pass it on. It was a lot about, many folks focused on investments. It seems to be a favorite item for solutions, but my notes basically said you can change the trajectory of a life from $0 up to $70 million. So if you have no dollars, why don't you ask your employees about their child care situations? Find out how they made their choices about where they're putting their child. Is it about quality, or is it about location? That costs you nothing, but the most important part of that is to listen so that you understand the situation. And if you're an employer of 1 or 2 employees, or if you have 100 to 1,000 employees, you can make different types of decisions. Or also for no dollars, why don't you ask somebody to volunteer or mentor? Whether that's in a school system, or whether that's in a child care facility or early learning center, or in somebody's home. There's got to be a way that your employees can get a greater perspective of life. If you've got $5, buy a book, read it to somebody, and then pass it on. Make sure that it stays in a facility or goes to a family that doesn't have it. If you've got $10, take someone to lunch and explain to them why you care about early learning. And share those stories, or buy a bag of bagels and do a site visit to an early learning center, or buy a book of stamps and write enough letters that until you run out of stamps, and then do it again next month. If you've got $100, buy a learning toy or a bike or some sort of kit and contribute it to a facility. If you've got $250, take a trip to the Capitol and talk to a legislator, or better yet, talk to them when they're at home when it costs you a little bit less. If you've got $1,000, we were actually talking about help a facility create marketing programs. That came up during the days. But for this, I'll say, why not do a little bit of tuition reimbursement for families who have to pay, almost the cost of a college education every single year if they have to place somebody in an early learning center. If you've got $10,000, fund a fellow at the community level. Help somebody by making sure that there are scholars, students, interns, people who are actually raising the education level, the activity level across the state. If you've got $100,000, fund the programs or the networks that are in your community, because it is a darn shame that right now we have waiting lists for people who are in the greatest needs to get into an early learning center or into an educational program or into a summer school program. If you've got $1 million or $70 million, call us, and we'll build a coalition and work with so many other people.
That's great. That was great.
I'm going to get a copy of those.
Thank you,
later.
absolutely. You got $1 million?
We'll talk about that later. I think business doesn't probably get enough credit for the efforts they do in the community. And Boeing and Procter & Gamble and Patagonia are great examples. And we watch, smaller businesses like ours, we watch what the corporate leaders that are in the press are doing, and I'm sure Jim does too. So I'll tell you what we do and kind of what we've evolved into. We have now 1,300 employees, and we're spread out at 20 locations in 7 states. But we decided about 7 years ago to more formalize our charitable giving, so we committed to giving 5% of our prior year's profit in the current year in the communities we work in, and we asked that be directed 2% of that by each group, each branch group, and 3% by our corporate group on behalf of the 20 branches. And it's not easy to do that and do it wisely and do it consistently. So we struggle with that. But a couple of good things have come, and one is our employees respect us for doing it. And when you think about, we talked about the challenge of attracting and retaining good people. Well, that's one thing. They look at us and go, this company does that, and maybe some of our competition doesn't. So it's a benefit when it comes to recruiting and retaining. And the other thing is we don't pay a lot. Our landscape workers are not on the high end of the pay scale across the country. They're on the lower end, and they don't often have money to give away. But this gives them a chance to participate in giving. And I think that does great things for morale, but it also does good things for the receiver because it's heartfelt. And so a lot of that gets distributed in small ways by lots of people over time. So I think to talk about that, how to influence others, just to let them know that's what we're doing, and I think lead by example like so many companies that are here have done. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think as I think about how to bring more businessmen under our tent, I think is really what you're talking about, Gloria. And I know this particular group is probably, this is the choir, and there is not an elevator speech for early childhood, early ed. It's a little more difficult than that. We all have probably learned that talking to businessmen and politicians, or even another matter. But what I found is there's a couple of interesting things. One is, again, back to Dr. Jana's book, is that there's got to be some effort to connect with the jargon and the language that the person you're talking to speaks in. And as businessmen, we all probably get lots of calls for donations and lots of pitches. And usually the pitches are in the language of the pitcher rather than the receiver. And it's so important I think, to try and figure out who those folks are that have a particular interest and how this larger subject of early ed fits into it. And I can give you a couple examples, but I know in Cincinnati and in the state of Ohio in particular, there's been a lot of emphasis on infant mortality. And It's almost as if you can't go to the State House without having to try and address that somehow or talk your way into that. And what's truly interesting in the case of home visitation with Every Child Succeeds, the organization I was talking about, is their infant mortality rate is 4.7. And that's compared to Cincinnati, which is about 9.8. And it is, the results are the same across all races. And for any of you involved in looking at infant mortality, you know that African American rates are usually 2 to 3 or more times Caucasian rates. So there's ways, I think, when you listen more, you maybe do a little research to try and figure out who you're talking to, that you can find ways to talk in their language to some degree. The other thing is what Ready Nation in particular does a great job of is having an unexpected messenger. And so businessmen will like to talk to businessmen. And businessmen will also like to hear from some of the other sister organizations at Ready Nation. They like to talk to retired military officers. And maybe an evangelical pastor can maybe deliver a speech or a sermon that'll a layman's sermon. Or they also have like sports and celebrities that do this. It's so often to try and find the right messenger, not just the right message. And businessmen, like all of us, appreciate, hearing from somebody you're interested in. And I can tell you, as I got involved with Every Child Succeeds, is actually how I met John Pepper, the former CEO of Procter & Gamble, and Jim Zimmerman, the former CEO of Macy's, who are the co-chairs of the Early Childhood Task Force at Ready Nation. And that's how I met Sarah, and then that's how I met Catherine, who's apparently the latest rock star in the group, because everybody seems to love her like I do. And by the way, I told her she was a rock star today during a break, and she went on to tell me why she wasn't, and I told her she was deflecting, and then she went on to tell me why she wasn't. But those are the kind of conversations Catherine and I have. But I think it's important, those two things, is the message and the messenger. And so often, what I found is for instance, the Ready Nation meetings I've had, and by the way, any businessman can join Ready Nation for free. There's no charge, there's no nothing. You're just committing to be interested in the same topic, and maybe you get asked to go speak or go be somewhere, or you get to join the other executives at their meeting. But it's so important to have those kind of conversations with each other, and I think that combination of message and messenger is what is so critical and so important for us all to work on.
Thank you.
Can I clarify real quick?
Sure.
I hope that everybody understands and hasn't already tweeted that 80% of the businesses where I live don't care about early childhood. The point I was making is that most of them are in survival mode, and really all they know is that they're having trouble getting workers. And they know there's millages, they know there's taxes, they know there's immigration issues, they know there's a plethora of issues. And so they're not focused on the issue of early child development the way that we are in this room. So when I say they don't care about it, it's really more of they're not tracking it. They're not aware of it, even though we think we're getting this message out over and over and over again. They're bombarded with messages about what their business should be doing and how they should be doing it to attract talent. And so our messages really do need to be more focused on the people that are paying attention.
Are there any other comments before we go to questions that kind of is important for you to get out before we start responding to questions, other questions?
Could I make one quick comment? I really appreciate this being an event that is focused a lot on childcare, but I think it's so important that we do talk about systems and the continuum rather than the silos, because we will all have a difficult time making our pitch and getting the results we want unless we make sure that it is this kind of continuum. And a continuum doesn't mean that there's referrals at the end of this program or a connection made. It is, I think, one of the real challenges that have not been met is to make sure that this is a system-wide approach, and whether we're trying to get to kindergarten readiness or third grade reading or whatever it is, that we start at prenatally and we make sure that we're addressing generally 2 generations all the way through in an effective manner.
That's a great thing to close with. Thank you very much. So now we'd like to open up questions, and I can tell you that it's very difficult to see if someone raises their hand. So I might suggest that you'd stand up, and then we'd at least be able to look in the right direction.
Sarah Watson. Thank you, Jim. What a nice thing to say about Ready Nation. I would just say, in addition to Tony's list of what you can do if you have $1, if you have 5 minutes, the Child Care and Development Block Grant is up for renewal, and that is almost $3 billion for child care for low-income workers, many of whom work for companies that are represented in this room. So supporting that, I think, would be an excellent use of 5 minutes, and we'd be happy to help you all do that.
Very timely.
And to be clear, that means write your member of Congress now, right? Is that what you're trying to say? Okay.
Any other questions?
I'm wondering if there's some mechanism or some way. When I think of champions, I read some books about every child needs a champion. I think every industry needs a champion, and probably within every state. And certainly, when I think of Colorado, I think of David Mirage. And what he did, and what a difference it's made. When I think of Florida, I think of David Lawrence. I met that man once, and now he's on every email. I just get bombarded with stuff, and I think, I don't even live in Florida. And when I think of Ohio, actually, Jim, I think of you, because I've met a lady by the name of Diana Halstead, who's now in Tennessee, and she's telling me about you and what you're doing up around in Ohio and Cincinnati. And, it occurred to me that some significant advances and changes that have helped our industry come because of businessmen who take on the role as champions of the industry and go out there and spread the message and interact. And so I think we need a Champions Academy or something, or some mechanism by way we develop and grow champions for early childhood education and families. So I don't know if any of you are willing to take that on, or, no? Okay.
Actually, if I might say, that's Dave Lawrence's is my state, and I know that he's watching, so he's probably already emailed you. Go ahead and respond. We have created a business alliance for early learning with the idea of doing everything from bringing people together, sharing information, creating infographics, going out into communities, have town halls, town council meetings, preparing speeches and kits so that we can get the words out there, research. But the most important part about research is research in space action, not inaction, because having all the information and not sharing it is the most important. Is a very important part of this. The tough part is we have got to create a wave well beyond those of you who feel this strongly about everything, and I think that we're doing that. I think people want to and understand this. I think that there are demographic reasons, boomers who are closer now to younger children who understand the opportunities that they could have gotten right, multi-generational issues that make caregiving of seniors almost as important as the caregiving issues of youth. They're all correlated. We just have to create opportunities to connect dots for folks. People want to be champions. And by the way, Dave Lawrence makes sure that all the other states get their children right, is because 1,000 of you are moving into Florida every single day, and we want you to do it right so that we can get the best and brightest. So thank you.
Do we have any other questions? I think...
There's one in the middle.
Way back there? Okay.
I have a question. Speaking for those of us who actually work with the children, so your workforce of tomorrow, and those of us that are teaching at the college level, so are preparing the teachers who are going to be teaching the workforce also of tomorrow. Small businesses, medium-sized businesses, very large businesses, is there ever a desire to help us on that level, on the lower level, individual level, to help a center, to help the colleges, where we can partner somehow, whether through mentoring, whether through especially funding, or is it more considered a global thing? And if it is more of a, that we could reach out somehow to get partnerships with these businesses, large and small, what advice would you give us how we can go about getting that partnership.
I can talk about just from Colorado's perspective. We have on the website, we have a website to support the child care contribution tax credit. And in that realm, in Colorado, the centers have to make the ask to the taxpayer or the business or the individual that's making the donation. So we've tried to provide a kind of a toolkit that is made available to the child care providers as a starting point, because I do believe that if asked, many businesses will respond in a way that makes sense to them, whether it's providing mentorship or whether it's providing money or whatever it might be. But I can give you the website. It's coloradoepic.org, and you'll see a big CCTC on our homepage, not a really fancy homepage, a really basic homepage. But click on that and it will take you to all the resources that have been made available to the child care provider community, as well as how maybe the taxpayer could respond. So it's not highly technical, but it's a resource that kind of can maybe get the juices flowing from your own perspective.
And we also, the Children's Leadership Council of Michigan, if you search for that, the Children's Leadership Council of Michigan just published a to-do list as part of a policy conference last month that the Detroit Regional Chamber puts on. And it has what to do for legislators, what to do for businesses, and what to do for nonprofits for how to impact this. And then, of course, it ends with this toolkit from EPIC. So I asked Gloria today, I said, yeah, I might refer to this toolkit in Colorado. Do you know anything about it? It's kind of embarrassing for me, but.
That's a separate one. That's the employer toolkit. And you mentioned David Mirage. That was funded by the Mirage Foundation at 8 or 9, 10 years ago. So I keep checking it to make sure that the information is still technically correct, and it is. That leads to kind of my thoughts with Sarah is that there are some tweaks that I think could be done at the federal level that are not earth-shattering, but could have significant impact to families. So one example, it's part of this toolkit, so it's where I'd like to see it get updated, is that the cafeteria plans that most businesses have for their families allow for a pre-tax withholding for childcare, that the employee can say, reduce my weekly or monthly salary by X amount and then pay it to me in a pre-tax basis that I would pay directly to my child care center. So there's a matching part where the business can pay $5,000 toward the child care for their employees. And I don't know if this is technically correct, but I say it lovingly that I think in my adult perspective, that number has never changed. And I know that child care has gone up a lot. So if we want to just kind of tweak some things that are out there to refresh them, it would be to increase that $5,000 limitation to $10,000 or some other number that I don't think would be controversial. So, I mean, there are just a lot of little things that can be done that will add up, and we'll just keep spreading the word, and maybe someday some of these things will happen. Any other questions? I don't see anybody standing up, so I'm going to assume that's no. I really want to thank the panel. I think you all have been stunning, superb, and I really do enjoy your comments. Well, thank you for all you guys do.